This is a stone specimen from the surface of Mars. When you examine the central region closely, focusing on these darkened markings, you'll observe what may be the preserved remnants of ancient Martian organisms. At the very least, that's the most probable interpretation of what you're observing. This represents NASA's announcement from September 2025. This could very well constitute the most definitive indication of life we have ever identified on Mars. In fact, this stands as the most compelling evidence ever uncovered of extraterrestrial organisms, and it exists within a rock specimen gathered by the Perseverance Mars rover. So what is it about these markings that suggests life must have existed on another world? The answer is intricate, but we're going to explore it thoroughly today. Let's begin by discussing the Martian location where this extraordinary rock was discovered. This is Jezero Crater, the touchdown point for NASA's Perseverance rover, representing the most sophisticated robotic explorer humanity has ever dispatched to the Red Planet. NASA selected this particular landing zone for a highly specific purpose. Scientists believe that billions of years in the past, this circular basin contained liquid water. The basis for our belief that Jezero once functioned as an ancient lake stems from this breach in the crater rim, where we observe fairly unmistakable evidence that a river system flowed down from the adjacent highlands and discharged into the crater basin. That location marks where Perseverance touched down in 2021, at the delta of the river system. That's also the site where NASA calculated they would possess the greatest possible opportunity of discovering evidence precisely like what we're examining today. If life had emerged on Mars, it would have been situated in an environment exactly like this one. However, that doesn't mean such evidence would be simple to locate. 3 years of systematic exploration passed before Perseverance finally encountered this one remarkably unusual-looking rock protruding from the sandy surface. What distinguishes this rock as exceptional is that dark, recurring pattern stretching across its surface. NASA refers to the smaller specks as poppy seeds, while the larger formations are called leopard spots. Before we proceed any further, let's establish the scale we're working with, because the photograph we've been examining is actually an extreme magnification. Even the larger leopard spots measure only 1 or 2 millimeters in diameter, which means that any alien life responsible for creating this would have been extraordinarily small. We're discussing microorganisms and bacteria, which individually are far too microscopic to be detected by Perseverance. Therefore, what we're searching for is evidence that these microorganisms once thrived here. The traces they would have left behind. That's what those dark markings represent, a waste material generated by active microbial organisms. In the simplest possible terms, this is fossilized Martian excrement, or at minimum, that represents the most plausible interpretation we currently possess. The initial action NASA took after identifying the enigmatic pattern was to deploy the rover's robotic arm and utilize its complete array of scientific instruments to begin determining what was occurring at the microscopic level. The preliminary observations revealed that this is sedimentary rock, indicating that it formed gradually over millions of years as the river flowed through the area and deposited successive layers of minerals into the muddy substrate. Then, as those layers became compressed under their own mass and the river eventually evaporated, the mud transformed into solid stone. On Earth, sedimentary rocks frequently contain fossils, because plant and animal remains become trapped within the layers and are preserved through the hardening process. What's particularly intriguing about this specific location is that it contains some of the youngest sedimentary rock NASA has ever identified on Mars. It dates back approximately 3 billion years. This means the time frame during which Mars could have supported life is more extensive than we previously estimated. If accurate, it reveals that life existed on Earth and Mars simultaneously, both evolving in remarkably similar ways. However, the only method to confirm this with certainty is to conduct a deeper investigation. You can observe this in a self-portrait captured by Perseverance in July 2024. The team controlling the rover already understood that this would be a moment deserving documentation. The rock appears right in the center of the frame. The small white circle marks where the rover's drill penetrated and extracted a sample that might eventually be transported back to Earth for additional analysis, though we'll return to that topic later. On Mars, Perseverance managed to provide us with some preliminary findings that astonished NASA scientists. The rover identified 2 iron-based minerals within the leopard spots, vivianite and greigite. We frequently encounter these minerals inside comparable patterns here on Earth. When we do discover them, they're typically linked to microbial life, otherwise known as bacteria. More specifically, vivianite and greigite are found in environments containing decaying plant and animal matter. Microorganisms arrive and consume all of that dead organic material. Subsequently, they produce these iron-rich minerals as a metabolic byproduct. It's microbial waste. It's crucial to understand that you don't require a dead animal on Mars to sustain those microorganisms. You only need the fundamental components of that animal. That's what the bacteria consume. This is what we classify as organic matter. Consider this: 96% of your body mass consists of just 4 essential elements in various combinations. Those components are oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen. We know that Mars contains this organic matter primarily in crater regions where it was delivered to the surface through asteroid impacts. Additionally, there were substantial quantities of organics discovered within the same rock that displayed the leopard spots. However, that alone doesn't confirm the presence of life. Therefore, we've been pursuing additional evidence. That's what the Vivianite and the Greigite provide for us. Now we possess the ingredients necessary for life, and we have the byproduct of life. So consequently, to connect these findings, we must have evidence of life on Mars, correct? Well, that's not precisely what NASA is stating. They are exercising great care to maintain a cautiously optimistic yet not conclusive tone in their announcement of this new discovery. There's valid reasoning behind that approach. Here's footage from 1996 that shows American President Bill Clinton announcing the discovery of what appeared to be a fossilized life form within a meteorite that had broken off from Mars's surface and landed on Earth in Antarctica. What they discovered certainly resembled a tiny worm, but upon more detailed analysis, this proved to be a non-biological phenomenon. It was simply water interacting with the rock and creating a worm-like structure. Having the president inform the world that you've found fossilized aliens, only for it to turn out to be just an oddly shaped rock, that's not a favorable outcome. NASA also committed a similar error 20 years earlier during the Viking missions of 1976. That marked the first occasion the American space program had ever landed on Mars. Scientists were anxious to identify the first signs of Martian life. They had the Viking probe execute a straightforward experiment, where it collected a small quantity of Martian soil and then introduced it to a mixture of water and nutrients. The concept was that if microorganisms were alive in the soil, they would absorb the water, consume the nutrients, and generate a byproduct very similar to what we've been discussing thus far. In this case, NASA was specifically monitoring for the release of carbon dioxide gas from the sample. That is exactly what they detected. After the nutrient solution was added to the soil, it generated carbon dioxide, which would suggest a biological process. For a brief moment, scientists believed they had confirmed the existence of alien life. But the excitement didn't endure long. While alien biology represents one explanation for the carbon dioxide, it's not the sole explanation. There are numerous chemical combinations that can produce carbon dioxide gas, like when you combine vinegar with baking soda. Neither of those substances are alive, and there was no evidence of organic material found in the Viking soil samples, meaning there were none of the ingredients for life to exist initially. So all they truly possessed was a small amount of carbon dioxide gas, and the experiment was designated inconclusive. The astronomer Carl Sagan coined a profoundly important principle on his 1980s television program Cosmos. He would frequently state, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." That is the approach that NASA is adopting with their latest discovery on Mars. In the years following the initial discovery of the leopard spots, scientists from across the globe have been attempting to prove that this is not a discovery of alien life. Simply observe how many names are listed on this research paper. If the evidence can withstand extreme scrutiny and no other reasonable explanation can be identified, then it might just be sufficient to be considered extraordinary. That is where we stand right now. There are only 2 other potential explanations for the leopard spots that could refute the alien hypothesis. The first is a high-temperature reaction. The dark patterns could have been created by extremely hot water in the range of 150 to 200 degrees Celsius that interacted with the rock at some point billions of years ago. However, the surface of Mars is frigid, and there's no evidence suggesting that this riverbed was ever exposed to intense heat of any kind. We also know that Vivianite specifically can only form at low temperatures. It would actually have been destroyed by heat if any had ever been present, so this scenario probably didn't occur. The second explanation is an acidic water reaction, which proposes that the spots might have been formed through very prolonged exposure to highly acidic liquid. But there's no other evidence in the rock suggesting that it was ever submerged in acid. In fact, they also discovered a mineral called olivine in the same rock specimen. Olivine cannot form in an acidic environment, so this scenario probably didn't happen either. That leaves us with the alien microorganism hypothesis. In this instance, it's the only theory that cannot be disproven. So through the process of elimination, it's the theory most likely to be accurate. This means that for the first time in history, we can confidently state that there was probably life on Mars. This is extraordinary. It would signify that life is not exclusive to Earth. You don't require some incredibly rare set of circumstances for this process to commence. All you need are the essential ingredients, which is fundamentally just liquid water and organic matter. Anywhere in the universe where we discover those ingredients, we will discover life. Unfortunately, we still cannot declare this with 100% certainty. That's because we understand the evidence is incomplete. There is only so much that the instruments aboard Perseverance can reveal to us. This is a mobile research laboratory that was launched into space and then landed on Mars. It can accomplish a great deal, but it cannot accomplish everything. There are so many additional tests we could conduct on the leopard spots if we had access to the sample here on Earth, but we don't. It could be considerable time before we ever do, if ever. Perseverance has collected 27 rock cores from Jezero crater and its surrounding riverbeds. It extracts them and then stores them in metal tubes that are subsequently left behind on the surface. The plan was always that another Mars rover would follow along in the near future and retrieve the samples, then load them into a return vehicle that would launch from Mars and eventually land on Earth with the rocks secured inside. Mars sample return is complicated and expensive. As of right now, the United States government does not want to fund the cost for NASA to complete the mission. They would prefer someone else undertake it, even though NASA has more experience landing on Mars than any other organization on the planet. In fact, the only other space agency that has ever successfully landed on Mars is China. The Chinese have their own Mars sample return mission planned. It's scheduled to launch in 2028 and arrive back home with the Martian rock in 2032. The Chinese can afford it. They probably possess the technical capability to accomplish it. Now they know exactly where to search for the first genuine evidence of extraterrestrial life. Not that it should really matter who discovers what, correct? This is about science. But it also does somewhat matter, doesn't it? This is science that will transform Eve. Right thing we believe we understand about life in the universe. NASA is so close yet so far away, but it's important to remember that none of this is impossible. The funding exists. We simply need the collective determination to invest it in a project that will be challenging, that might fail, and will have a timeline that extends beyond the 4-year election cycle. So it very well could be that a discovery like this, the first genuine evidence of extraterrestrial life, is exactly what we needed at this moment to remind the people in positions of authority that NASA science is important, that it's worth investing in. One way or another, the truth exists out there. All we need to do is venture out and retrieve it.